and environmental-friendly materials, making it a true green factory. With the construction concept of first-class equipment and technology for first-class products, Mayer Smart Factory has built over 10 advanced production lines, including the flexible automated production line of dental CBCT, the color sorter assembly line, automatic circuit board SMT production line, unmanned maglev ejector production line, electrical box and sorting box assembly line, which feature high quality, high efficiency, and environmental protection. Mayer Smart Factory delivers a giant leap in stability and reliability. Also, quality of Mayer products is fully upgraded, and equipment maintenance costs are effectively reduced. That makes customers worry-free totally. Quality is all. Mayer is constantly striving towards the goal of, no matter it is to produce 1 unit or 10,000 units, the quality is consistent. In addition, Mayer Smart Factory has reduced material waste from the source for production and become more environmentally friendly, fulfilling Mayer's commitment to environmental protection. Also, Mayer Smart Factory is an important part of Green Mayer, which advocates green design, green production, and green management, and gradually realizes the harmony between human and nature, and the harmony between enterprise and society. Mayer Smart Factory is a big step in intelligent manufacturing, which guided by Mayer core values of pursuing quality and serving customers. Another intelligent coating sheet metal production base covering an area of 15 acres and a total investment of $55 million is also under construction. All we do is for product quality. Quality is all.
Spinning Cashew is an innovative program aimed at strengthening and growing the Beninese cashew sector. Its goal is to create a more productive, competitive, sustainable, and inclusive economic growth engine for the people of Benin. It's being funded by the USDA and is being implemented by TechnoServe and our partners at CRS. Over 8 years, Benin Cashew will increase the yields and incomes of more than 49,000 smallholder farmers, triple Benin's domestic processing capacity, create more than 3,400 jobs, most of which will be held by women, and will position the entire sector for continued growth long after the project ends.
TechnoServe travaille avec des hommes et des femmes pour bâtir des fermes et des entreprises compétitives qui contribuent à la réduction de la pauvreté, à l'augmentation de la résilience des bénéficiaires et de leur communauté. Nous restons convaincus que la participation pleine et entière des femmes et des filles permet de maximiser la croissance économique inclusive pour un développement généralisé. Au sein de la production agricole et notamment de la filière cajou, bien que présentes, les femmes sont confrontées à des difficultés en ce qui concerne l'accès aux facteurs de production, notamment la terre, les ressources financières, la technologie et les formations. Au début du projet Bénin Cajou, la participation des femmes était d'environ 20,57%. À fin décembre 2020, ce taux est passé à 34,67% au sein de la production et à 39% au sein du projet. L'objectif étant d'atteindre au moins 40% de participation des femmes. Pour atteindre ce résultat, nous avons mis en place un dispositif institutionnel avec tous les partenaires du projet pour intégrer.
Les impressions sont bonnes, surtout être à la tête d'une fédération nationale des producteurs d'anacarde du Bénin. Les points clés de mes actions sont relatifs à la recherche des partenaires pour améliorer la qualité de nos activités.
Investissez dans les filières coton et anacarde, créez de la valeur ajoutée et contribuez à la lutte contre la pauvreté en milieu rural. Les filières coton et anacarde ivoiriennes, ce sont un potentiel de production de plus de 600 000 tonnes de coton graines, 258 000 tonnes de fibres de coton, une position de premier producteur et premier exportateur mondial de noix brutes de cajou, un potentiel d'installation de plus de 100 unités de transformation de noix brutes de cajou d'une capacité de 5 000 tonnes, un marché d'intrants coton de plus de 60 milliards de francs CFA par campagne agricole, plus du quart de la production mondiale et près de la moitié de l'offre mondiale de noix brutes de cajou, un immense potentiel de création d'emplois et de richesses.
In addition,
Accès aux facteurs de production, notamment la terre, les ressources financières, la technologie et les formations. Au début du projet Bénin Cashew, la participation des femmes était d'environ 20,57%. À fin décembre 2020, ce taux est passé à 34,67% au sein et à 9% au sein du projet. L'objectif étant d'atteindre au moins 40% de participation des femmes. Pour atteindre ce résultat, nous avons mis en place un dispositif institutionnel avec tous les partenaires du projet pour intégrer le genre au sein de toutes les activités de ce projet. Nous avons un dispositif basé sur des points focaux genre qui ont reçu des formations sur différentes techniques, différentes thématiques. Nous avons mené aussi un plaidoyer pour la modification des tests statutaires des fêtières, des producteurs de cajou afin d'alléger les conditions d'accès des femmes aux coopératives. Et nous avons pu avoir une femme présidente du conseil.
USDA and is being implemented by TechnoServe and our partners at CRS. Over 8 years, Benin Cashew will increase the yields and incomes of more than 49,000 smallholder farmers, triple Benin's domestic processing capacity, create more than 3,400 jobs, most of which will be held by women, and will position the entire sector for continued growth long after the project ends.
Technoserve travaille avec des hommes et des femmes pour bâtir des fermes et des entreprises compétitives qui contribuent à la réduction de la pauvreté, à l'augmentation de la résilience des bénéficiaires et de leur communauté. Nous restons convaincus que la participation pleine et entière des femmes et des filles permet de maximiser la croissance économique inclusive pour un développement généralisé. Au sein de la production agricole et notamment dans la filière cajou, bien que présentes, les femmes sont confrontées à des difficultés en ce qui concerne l'accès aux facteurs de production, notamment la terre, les ressources financières, la technologie et les formations. Au début du projet Bénin Cajou, la participation des femmes était d'environ 20,57%. À fin décembre 2020, ce taux est passé à 34,67% au sein de la production et à 39% au sein du projet. L'objectif étant d'atteindre au moins 40% de participation des femmes. Pour atteindre ce résultat, nous avons mis en place un dispositif institutionnel avec tous les partenaires du projet pour intégrer le genre au sein de toutes les activités de ce projet. Nous avons un dispositif basé sur des points focaux genre qui ont reçu des formations sur différentes techniques, différentes thématiques. Nous avons mené aussi un plaidoyer pour la modification des tests statutaires des fêtières des producteurs de cajou afin d'alléger les conditions d'accès des femmes aux coopératives. Et nous avons pu avoir une femme présidente du conseil d'administration de la fêtière des producteurs d'anacarde et une femme présidente du conseil de surveillance de cette même organisation, ce qui est une première au Bénin au sein de la filière anacarde.
Après mon élection à la FENAPAB, les impressions sont bonnes, surtout être à la tête d'une fédération nationale des producteurs d'anacarde du Bénin. Les points clés de mes actions sont relatifs à la recherche des partenaires pour améliorer la qualité de nos activités, développer le plaidoyer à l'endroit de l'État pour qu'il nous accompagne.
J'ai constaté qu'avec cette formation, la femme a un grand rôle à jouer pour l'émancipation et la prospérité, bien partagée qu'à l'intérieur, qu'à l'extérieur, au sein du foyer. Grâce à cette même formation, la population, mais la communauté a un regard craintif en nous. Ils nous copient, ils voient la manière dont nous vivons avec mon épouse. Grâce à cette formation, nous avons pu réaliser beaucoup de choses.
Cette formation que nous avons eue sur le genre nous a réveillés par rapport à la femme, parce que dans le maillon production, on a constaté que les femmes n'ont pas assez à la tête, donc du coup, elles sont marginalisées. Donc sur le terrain, nous voyons à ce que les femmes sont prises en compte. Et comme le projet le recommande 40% de femmes, il faut dire que ce n'est pas facile. 40% des femmes dans tout ce que nous faisons, on doit pouvoir toucher au moins 40% de femmes.
Investissez dans les filières coton et anacarde, créez de la valeur ajoutée et contribuez à la lutte contre la pauvreté en milieu rural. Les filières coton et anacarde ivoiriennes, ce sont un potentiel de production de plus de 600 000 tonnes de coton-graines, 258 000 tonnes de fibres de coton, une position de premier producteur et premier exportateur mondial de noix brutes de cajou, un potentiel d'installation de plus de 100 unités de transformation de noix brutes de cajou d'une capacité de 5 000 tonnes, un marché d'intrants coton de plus de 60 milliards de francs CFA par campagne agricole, plus du quart de la production mondiale et près de la moitié de l'offre mondiale de noix brutes de cajou, un immense potentiel de création d'emplois et de richesses.
What do you care most when buying color sorters? What makes better sorting performance? What ensures high stability and reliability regardless of 1 unit or 10,000 units? Quality is all. Mayer's Smart Factory is built for production of color sorters and dental CBCT. The factory has completed its first phase construction and is the most advanced production base in the industry. Mayer's Smart Factory started construction in March 2018 with a construction area of nearly 70,000 square meters and a total investment of nearly $45 million. It takes full consideration of resource conservation, environmental protection, and employee health and safety before designing. The factory takes a multi-layer framed corridor structure, making full use of natural ventilation and lighting. Also, it adopts first-class energy-saving facility-friendly materials, making it a true green factory. With the construction concept of first-class equipment and technology for first-class products, sorter assembly line, automatic circuit board SMT line, electrical box, and sorting box assembly line, which feature high quality, high efficiency, and environmental protection. Mayer's Smart reduced. That makes customers worry-free, totally.
Right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. And welcome to the Global Markets Encounter with Jim Fitzpatrick. It's been 3 weeks since the last GME, and we are expecting that we will be updated on what has happened in the different producing and processing countries. And for us to also know how the market is turning out and to be able to position our businesses properly. I see Jim's presentation showing, but before I hand over to Jim, let me also mention that this session is held in English with simultaneous translation into French, and you can select the language of your choice using the feature at the bottom. Again, let me also say that we are available on Facebook Live and YouTube, and the session is being recorded so that it can be available to us as reference material for the picture also. Again, let me acknowledge GIZ move, USDA, CNFA Pro Cashew, TechnoServe Benin Cashew, SNI, MEA, CMA, CGM, Intersnack, and Com who have made this possible. At this stage, I would like to invite Jim Fitzpatrick as I wait for his video. Hello, Jim, are you there?
I'm here.
Very good, Jim. So Jim will be accompanied, will be joined later on by John Rao from Guinea-Bissau, so that we can have also more of an update from that region, as well as Boubacar Kunta, who is the president of the Senegal Interprofession. So at this stage, Jim, I hand over to you, and welcome, and it's nice to see you are well and kicking. So please take over from here. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is the Global Encounter number 32, believe it or not. And today we're going to talk about the usual subjects. We're going to start off by talking about the current market situation and a summary of that. We'll have a review of the harvests and production. There's been some changes since we were last together online. And finally, we'll focus in with our guests and specialists on the common crops in Guinea-Bissau and in Senegal, two important producing countries. So let's start by having an overview of our market indicators and the trends in the market. And as you will have seen if you've joined us before, I focus on four basic areas as the major market indicators. First of all, the crops. So if you see an orange arrow horizontal, it means no real change. If you see a red arrow going downwards, it means things have gotten worse. If you see a green arrow going upwards, it means things have gotten better. So if we look at crops and we're considering what's happened in the last 3 weeks, where really the situation in Southeast Asia hasn't changed a great deal in terms of the outlook for the crops. In India, unfortunately, forecasts now are showing reduced production this year and possibly reduced quality this year. And in West Africa, we are seeing a couple of things happening as the crops go on. They're perhaps not as promising as initially thought. And we're also seeing, of which we'll hear more later, I hope, we're also seeing crops perhaps drifting out a couple of weeks in the latest harvest areas of Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, and perhaps the Gambia too. If we look at farm gate prices, we can see that generally speaking, farm gate prices in the major Asian producers are higher. It's not that the actual price is higher, but the same price is being paid for a lower quality product. In West Africa, farm gate prices are steady, relatively stable, and they haven't really been affected by the sharp upward movement in the international price of raw cashew nuts. If we look at the international RCN trade, generally prices are higher. Throughout West Africa, I would say, more in some countries than in others, perhaps more in Benin than in others, but certainly prices are higher. Costs, as everywhere at the moment, costs are continuing to rise. Freight and other costs are rising, and we have the complications of a very strong dollar at the moment too. In terms of the trade volume, it has picked up a little, but not significantly. The trade this year is steady rather than anything else. So when we look at farm gate prices and international RCN trade, we notice that the farm gate prices have not really been impacted by the international increases, mostly due to a slower volume of trade than you would normally think. Now, this is probably due to changes in buying patterns from Vietnam. Perhaps some of those changes in strategy have been forced, and it's probably due to the fact that the increase in production in Cambodia seen in the last 2 to 3 years means that Vietnamese buyers can come a little bit later to the market. If we look at kernels, we have seen kernels prices pick up significantly over the past 3 weeks, particularly in Vietnam, where, as I think we've said here many times, the prices were in any case unsustainable. Elsewhere, in West Africa, prices remain steady, FOB 320s, 315 to 330, and probably trending upwards at the moment. There's quite a lot of interest from buyers, and West Africa is particularly interesting for European buyers because they can buy there in euro, which exempts them from the risk of a very strong dollar at the moment. So with the CFA linked to the euro and buyers in Eurozone countries obviously wanting to buy in euros, that's quite an interesting mix. So if we look overall at the situation over the past 3 weeks, we're still continuing to see some generally upward pressure on prices. On one hand, you have concerns on demand, mostly driven by concerns on European demand, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too. You remember the last time we were online, we talked in detail about demand and the positive outlook for demand. We'll have a look at that a little bit later and briefly. On the other side, pushing upwards, we're seeing a situation where poorer crops in Asia, and particularly in the last couple of weeks, the change in the outlook for India, the prices of raw cashew nuts, additional kernels buying, and of course, higher costs, all tending to push prices a little bit higher. So at the moment, generally speaking, I'm seeing an upward pressure on prices in the market. That's across the board, with the possible exception of the farm gate prices in West Africa, which frankly are about right for the current market. So let's move on. Let's look at production, and we'll start in Asia, and we'll have a look at production, and particularly, of course, we'll have a look at the inventory in Asian countries, especially Vietnam. So starting though with the biggest producer in Asia, second largest in the world. And I think the biggest news of the last few weeks has been continued reduction in the crop forecast from India. Initially an optimistic 750,000 to 775,000 tons has now been marked back, but these are mostly trade sources, just to make that clear to you, down to what would be considered a low crop, ranging from 650 to 700,000 tons. Weather has been the main factor, and that continues to be difficult. And as time goes on, the chances to fix this problem diminish. So right now, we're plugging in two estimates. We're plugging in 650,000 tons as our low number and 700,000 tons as our high number. Meantime, we see demand strengthening in India, both demand for raw cashew nuts import and also for kernels in the domestic market. Very positive forecasts early in the year on Indian demand predicted a return to the growth levels last seen in 2019. Optimism post-pandemic, talks of a lot of catching up to do in society, but it's not entirely convincing just yet. If we look in Cambodia, the second largest producer in Asia, we still see some confusion in the reading of the market. I mean, you have to understand as well, I think, that confusion is often deliberate. We are still seeing a lot of numbers based on the fallacy of 1.1 million tons imported to Vietnam from Cambodia last year. This year, it looks like the crop is much more likely to be in the range of about 450,000 tons, which means at this stage that most of it has been sold. Certainly what's left in Cambodia is limited. I don't think we're going to see either distorted figures or actual further imports in any great volume this year. Moving on to Vietnam, it's not particularly news that the crop is lower this year. That's been known for some weeks. We see lower quality, lower quantity, generally yields down due to the growing conditions. What is news, I think, is that the inventory, so one of the big questions around Vietnam this year has been the transit inventory, the inventory in the hands of traders, one in particular, and it looks like that's been reduced, according to local sources, by about 35%. And there would be concerns on some of that inventory in terms of its quality. So let's just focus in on Vietnam for the moment. And let's have a look at the situation in Vietnam. So I've compiled a balance sheet for Vietnam projected to the 31st of May. So we take an estimate of the opening stock, which is the stock in the hands of processors as at the end of last year. This year's crop, the projected exports and domestic, that's the consumption in the country, which is very small, and the export of kernels. Imports, the figure we know is to mid-April. The transit stock estimated in the warehouses, what's afloat on vessels, giving us the availability. So when we work that out, it shows an availability of about 3.3 months of stock. So there's about 3.3 months of processing stock, taking all these factors into account. Now, 3.3 months is not a lot. A minimum processing stock would be the time taken to assemble, purchase, and move to a processor from West Africa additional raw nuts. And that would be a minimum of about 80 days, which is almost 3 months. So the inventory is relatively light for the time of year, despite the transit stock. And then we get the questions, what is the actual level of transit stock? So based on an opening figure around about 300,000 tons, we think there's somewhere just under 200,000 tons left. There are question marks about the quality of that material, particularly some of the very old material, and the yield that it will offer. It's not science, it's anecdotes, but there are reports of outturns on some of that material in the mid-30s, 35 pounds or thereabouts. Not all the stock, some of it's very good quality, but some of it is poor quality, and therefore poor qualities of shipped and afloat material, mostly from Côte d'Ivoire, of course. But the situation overall leaves us with a relatively tightening situation in Vietnam. In other words, late April, early May, it is time that Vietnamese buyers would be seen more active in the market. You'll notice that exports are down this year in Vietnam. Exports in the first quarter were down 5.7%. And if we look at that, we see a very clear reason, actually. We look at exports to North America, that's just the USA and Canada, exports to Germany and the Netherlands, the two most important import destinations in Europe, European Union being the third largest market in the world after the United States and India. And then we looked at China. So if we look at the exports to China, that's where we see the big drop. So what we did is we just, for the sake of an exercise, extracted China's comparative figures over the years. And if we take China out of the picture, Vietnamese exports are up by just under 3%. So this is very much about China. So looking at the Chinese buying from Vietnam in recent years, we see that the first quarter of the year is important. But we also see that the first quarter doesn't necessarily decide the outcome for the year. So if we look back to 2018, 2019, saw that the first quarter, the yellow bars, was roughly the same in both years, but the actual import over the entire year was much higher in 2019. In other words, that there is quite a bit of room for recovery later in the year in China. So we had a look at the monthly imports in China of cashews, and what we're seeing is a much more even spread of imports as the demand for cashews spreads in the country. If we look at 2020, you see a similar pattern. The decline in the first quarter, of course, 2020 being the first year of the pandemic, virtually no shipments to China during February or March. And the first quarter actually in that case did define what happened for the year as a whole. And again in 2021, a strong first quarter as the pandemic impact faded away, and that led to very strong imports in the year. Interestingly, and just as an aside, the imports into China from African countries, particularly Cote d'Ivoire, have increased. It's still a tiny part of the Chinese import, but they have increased in recent years. So when we look at this situation, we have to consider the impact of the trade from Vietnam into China. So it's very clear that the trade between Vietnam and China has a greater influence in the first quarter than its actual volume would suggest. And this seems to be due to the type of grades bought, the fact that you can ship fairly quickly from Vietnam to China and be paid fairly quickly, and that those fundings ahead of the Lunar New Year, Tet, in Vietnam are important for processors. So the part that China plays in the Vietnamese picture in the first quarter is critical and has a big influence, I think, on the market sentiment in Vietnam. What we are seeing now is that since the second half of April, certainly late April, more Chinese buyers back in the market. And that may well be part of the reason why the kernels market has drifted off those unsustainably low prices in Vietnam. So some reason to believe then that increases in kernels prices can be sustained for the rest of the year, and that Vietnamese buyers of raw cashew nuts may need to come to market. Either the processors or the traders that supply them may need to come to market in the coming weeks a little bit more aggressively than they have been seen so far this year. Let's have a look at India. So India, second largest producer of cashews, but the largest user of cashews, and most of those cashews are consumed in the domestic market. So we just did a comparison between our high and low estimates for the 2022 crop and compared that to the last, what we might describe as a normal year, 2019, leaving 2020 and 21 aside, because as we know, in both of those years, the pandemic had a huge influence on what happened to consumption in India. So if we just take the forecasts, these are not my forecasts alone, these are forecasts from a number of sources in India that have given us help to try and judge where that market is going. So generally consumption, we're looking at an increase in consumption over the 2019 figure. We don't think export will be much different. It will be a little bit improved again this year, hopefully returning to 2019 levels. We saw a dip in 2020 and 21 due to reduced processing and production, especially in the first half of the year. That would mean that import of cashews in India will increase significantly this year, both over the 2019 figure and over the 2021 figure, which is 875,000 tons approximately. And the two figures are different. So you have based on the lower crop estimate, the dark orangey color, and based on the higher crop estimate, the light orangey color. In both cases, imports are coming in on a calculation over 1 million tons, 1.13 million tons at the high end and 1.06 million tons at the lower end. Last year, India imported about 875,000 tons, and there were also from that some re-exports to Vietnam in the period. So this would mark a significant increase in the import of raw cashew nuts to India. And that's based on looking at the current situation, the stock, and allowing a slightly lower but a fairly normal closing stock at the end of the year. Is this surprising? Well, it probably isn't surprising. If we look at the comparison of production and imports of raw cashew nuts going back to 2014, we see a pattern emerging. And so the grey bars are the actual imports with the forecast on the right-hand side, the low 2020 and the high 2022, and then actual imports back over the years. So the first thing to note is that certainly on either our low or high estimate for this year, it would be the highest imports on record. The previous high was back in 2015, about 925,000 tons, I think, if memory serves me correctly. And then we saw a little bit of a fall away in imports as there was an improved crop. You can see the harvest rising And then we saw slower demand growth during the pandemic. So we saw a slowing of demand growth, and frankly, Indian demand was growing remarkably quickly. It was likely to take a breather, so to speak. But overall, this is part of a long-term trend. And what we're seeing is that the Indian crop, although it does show a little bit of volatility up and down in a range of 650 to 775, 780,000 tons, we're seeing a general trend over the period of India's imports, India's demand for raw cashew nuts rising. So if we were to project going back 2018, 2019, remove the pandemic, I think probably India's imports would have reached 1 million tons last year. And therefore, it's not that surprising that that would happen in the course of 2022. There are some higher estimates out there. Some people talk about 1.2 million tons. But let's see. We'll have to see how Indian demand recovers. It is strong at the moment, but there are a couple of factors that we need to look at, particularly currency factors. Remember, India is a net importer of raw cashew nuts, a huge net importer of raw cashew nuts. And we will have to see how exports perform in a market where the domestic price in India is so much higher than the international FOB price for W320s or any of the other kernels. So two interesting situations: reduced inventory in Vietnam as a consequence of a lower crop, but still significant inventory in place. Not a situation where Vietnam is still looking at a surplus. You'll see some really incredibly high numbers estimated in Vietnam, but don't forget they're based on the fallacy of a 1 million ton crop in Cambodia in 2021, which is certainly not correct. Secondly, in India, we would expect Indian buyers to continue their buying. They've been buying pretty steadily. You'll see preference for certain origins. We saw Ghana, we see Benin. We'll probably see Indian buyers active in Guinea-Bissau when the time comes. Let's turn our attention then to West Africa, and let's have a look at quickly, because there's not a huge amount of change in the West African situation. Nigeria, our report suggests processors have bought about 45,000 tons out of a crop, which I think is probably sub 200,000 tons. Exports have started. Exports from Nigeria remain slow due to the difficult logistics, but it is ongoing. And most of those, I think, will probably end up in Vietnam. If we look in Benin, exports are getting going now. I'm told there's about 30,000 tons moved to the port. Not sure whether it's shipped yet, but some of it must be on the way. Farm gate prices are strong. Opposite to the trend in other countries, farm gate prices have reacted. And RCN, the CFR prices for raw cashew nuts are very strong from Benin. As I mentioned, there is a preference for Benin material in India. In Togo, the initial very optimistic estimates of the crop seem to have been pulled back. It looks like the second crop has been a little bit disappointing. Farm gate prices are strong, and the crop estimate is certainly marked down. There was a figure floated earlier of 35,000 tons. From some people, I don't think that's likely to be anywhere near the reality as the season goes on. Probably somewhere 20,000 tons, perhaps maybe a little lower than that. Côte d'Ivoire is, of course, the biggest producer and will maintain that this year. Farm gate prices remain steady. They are workable for exporters. They are workable for processors. There has been support buying to support some less efficient processors. The second crop is normally of a lower quality. Reports differ, but generally speaking, as we move further north, and bear in mind the harvest moves north as the year goes on, it looks as if, at least in volume, it's a fairly good harvest. I'm told that there's about 650,000 tons in. Some say 60,000 has been bought by processors. Others say a little bit more. It's obviously not absolutely clear what that figure is. About 250,000 tons is exported, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And critically, the border, where there is has been in the past, a lot of informal and illegal trade, mostly into Ghana, this has been stemmed this year. So this means that farm gate prices are relatively steady. It's a good opportunity for processors who are efficient to buy raw cashew nuts, and there's really good buying support for those kernels mainly from European, but also from North American buyers. So it does look as if the continued development of processing in Côte d'Ivoire will continue this year, that we will have more cashews processed there than ever before, and that there'll be more, let's call them genuine exports of fully processed cashews to Europe and North America in 2022 than ever before, which is all good news. But the critical thing is that at this moment in time, the crop still looks as if it's going to hit in or around this 1 million tons level. Looking at Burkina Faso, continued problems. We spoke about these 3 weeks ago. The forecasts are lower, burned flowers, poor weather, and of course, a certain amount of security concerns. And this very much reflects a similar situation in Mali. ACA correspondents tell us about 61,000 tons has been traded, which would be the vast bulk of the crop. Farm gate prices have eased a little bit. I think that might be just seasonal. But there are, for Mali, political difficulties with sanctions, difficulties with security, not especially in the cashew area, but generally throughout the country, there have been problems. Normally, these are occurring north of the cashew area, but still causing some problems. And finally, Guinea, still a good crop coming in. There will probably be more cross-border trade this year than before, and the market looks quite steady. So overall, we've got a situation in these major West African producers of slightly lower production over the last 3 weeks to unchanged. Maybe drop in quality, but the situation is far from final and far from clear in certain areas. So we could be looking at, frankly, I don't think it's going to get better, but I think there's a chance that it could get a little bit worse in some countries. I haven't spoken about Senegal and Guinea-Bissau. I'm going to leave that to our guests, but I'll give you a quick introduction to those two countries, and I'll let our guests tell us a little bit more about the current situation. So, you know, the area we're talking about, the last cashew harvests of any year. West Africa, we have the three countries. Guinea-Bissau is a major producer. The crops over the years have varied between 180 and 230,000 tons. Relatively slow growing, highly regulated sector with difficult ports, difficult infrastructure, but very good quality raw cashew nuts mostly from old trees. And one of the issues in Guinea-Bissau is about how those trees can be rehabilitated, how overall production can be increased. The country is highly dependent on cashew nuts. If we look at Senegal, estimates of the crop widely vary. Difficult to make an accurate estimate because there is quite a bit of cross-border trade from Guinea-Bissau. The best figures we can come across are somewhere between 30 and 35,000 tons, but it is growing quickly. And these are very high quality raw cashew nuts, relatively low processing in the country. The Gambia, production estimates vary. We think it's about 12,000 tons, somewhere below 12,000 tons actually. Again, high quality products, new trees, and the future, a small market, but the future looks quite bright there. Key feature in this region is the cross-border trade. Cross-border trade, particularly from Guinea-Bissau, which I mentioned is a highly regulated sector, into Senegal. So the combination of highly regulated sector and a difficult infrastructure makes it attractive to move raw cashew nuts cross-border into Senegal for export or into the Gambia through Senegal for export. And some go south into Guinea as well. But I'll let our guests come back to us. It's a really interesting area for its high quality cashew nuts and looking at it for the prognosis of production over the longer term. Our guests will tell us more. So overall then, let's have a look at how we see the global crop. And what we're seeing now, and I think we can say this with some certainty, is that we're seeing lower forecasts almost everywhere. It's certainly true in Vietnam and Cambodia, that's widely recognized. It looks like a factor in India. Now, bear in mind, India has a huge area growing cashews, widely spread to different parts of the country. So we will hear different reports from different parts of the country. But based on what we're hearing so far, we're marking down the forecast. West Africa, too, we think that the crop will be lower than last year's crop. Now, last year was a very good crop, so we're not suggesting that there's a major problem. But what we are saying is that probably production is lower than last year, which would mean that it is still better than the previous year and the year before that. So generally a positive trend in production in West Africa, just maybe some complications, weather and infrastructure this year. And I think that's maybe one of the key considerations when we look at West Africa, that when buyers come later to the market, for raw cashew nuts in particular, when they come later to the market, it puts a strain on the infrastructure. It puts a strain on the preservation of the quality of the raw cashew nuts. If cashew nuts are left in villages, it's likely that they will have to be dried more than once. It's likely that there'll be rain. It's likely that they won't be properly stored. Often polypropylene bags are used instead of jute bags, and you can generally see a decline in quality, and that's a key concern. So you have the difficulty of, as buyers wait, probably to see their own situation develop, it means that they take the risk that the product they eventually receive will be of lower quality. And sometimes perhaps that's not very well understood by processors in Vietnam, I think. So a lower crop forecast almost this year. We know Indonesia, East Africa and Brazil, that's a fact. We know Vietnam and Cambodia is just about a fact, and India and West Africa remains forecasts or estimates based on the current trends. Quick return to demand. We looked at demand in detail last time. Quick return and have a look at that. So looking at our major consuming regions, if we take North America, the European Union and India, we have about 74% of world demand. So that's the place to focus on. Looking in Europe, at the moment, physical offtake is down a little bit. There is naturally, I think, something of a minor crisis of consumer confidence in the European Union. There is an increase in inflation due to higher energy costs, although the impact of that will alleviate. And I think what's important also to note is that European countries have remarkably reduced their dependence on Russian oil, for example, in recent weeks. Germany, as an example, has reduced its dependence on Russian oil to 12% only, from a figure of 35%. That's really significant in terms of two things: the impact of the war in Ukraine, and secondly, as time goes on, consumer confidence. It has been the case in the past, as we discussed 3 weeks ago, that in times of economic downturn, snack foods have prospered. That's not a given, but it does seem to be a factor, and it may well be a factor this coming year. Moving to the world's largest consumer, India, what we're seeing is a big improvement on consumption in 2022. The outlook is more positive. We're seeing a certain catch-up. Cashews are an important part of social events in India, and we're seeing something of a catch-up in family ceremonies, weddings, those kind of ceremonies, and something of a return to normal. Now, if we see a return to normal, that would be a significant spike in demand over 2021 or 2020 when we had the impact of the pandemic. Current estimates of economic progress in India in 2032 remain quite positive. Big question mark would be the currency. So we've seen the rupee between 75 and 77. We saw it take a little bit of a dip on Monday. It looks at the moment, I think, that that's not going to really affect demand, that we will see improved demand in India this year. But we have to be careful. It is, after all, only May. And India has two peaks, really. A minor peak at this time of year and in this quarter, and then a major peak when we get forward into September, October time. And those, we won't really know the outcome till we get toward the end of the year. But so far, so good, let's say. If we look at China, we have seen a surge in COVID restrictions in China, but we also see Chinese buyers back in the market. It's probably important to remember that, so China is a market of about 85,000 tons. It's about half the size of the Western European market. If we look at the influence of China in the market in the first quarter, it's very high, because there is a peak in consumption during that period. But its influence tends to wane as the year goes on. And as demand elsewhere kicks in, Europe, North America, peak demand is probably 6 months later than in China. Mid-year, imports mid-year tend to move up in preparation for those major festivals later in the year. In India, we see that peak I mentioned, usually in October. North America, certainly no currency impact in North America. The strong dollar has no negative impact on demand. Demand looks steady. You will see a lot of stories around. There are some short positions in the market. Generally, the North American market is quite price sensitive. Low prices, very low prices since last October, and low prices over the past 2 years have encouraged demand. And it seems to me as if demand, especially in the United States, will be strong again this year. If we were to see an impact, a negative impact, it's likely to be next year. So overall, when we look at this demand situation, we need to take into account what's happened in the past 3 or 4 years. Thinking about Europe, first of all, the European market's been growing dramatically. European consumption is up 37% since 2018. That's in terms of imports. If we look at how that happened, we saw 2 years of very strong growth, followed by last year, much slower growth. So it's not surprising at some point in time we see a little slowing in that demand. So I think what's really important when you look at European demand is to compare back 3-4 years to get a real comparison on how demand is going. So even if we see a slowing of offtake right now, or in the last 2 months, if we compare that to where we were 3 years ago, it's quite a dramatic increase. So you can't keep growing at 17% per annum. And therefore you're bound to see a slowing in growth at a certain point. That doesn't mean that we're going to see lower consumption. It just means we may well see slower growth. North America, I think we're going to see quite, last year 9%, just over 9% growth in imports. Some of that was inventory. So we're looking into a year where we're still seeing growth. If you look at the shipments from Vietnam so far, up to the end of March, we have figures quite strong. So I'd expect that the US consumption of cashews will continue to grow. We've talked about India, we've talked about China, generally a positive picture. Just be careful when you look at this market, and be careful that rising prices of kernels may cause problems for some people. And they will tend to talk about things that confound that. So they'll talk about demand. It was too much supply, now it's too little demand. As usual in cashews, nothing is ever clear. So let's have a look at the outlook as we see it. We think that the buying opportunity that we've been talking about since the first of this year's online sessions back in March, we think that that opportunity is closing. We think that kernels prices are steadying up and that they will continue to do so. We've seen raw cashew nut prices rise quite sharply. We expect that businesses will continue to be quite cautious. There are increases in costs of a whole range of commodities, particularly cereals. And we think that there's question marks over consumers' confidence, particularly in Europe, but not necessarily elsewhere. If we look at crops, West African crops, we think that the crops in the countries that we're now expecting to start deliver, we'll hear more about that in a few moments. We think that they may be slipping a little bit later, which has an impact too. This year, 2022, I think that there will be reduced processing volumes in Vietnam. That means fewer kernels available. It may also place a question mark over the final demand for raw cashew nuts. Definitely the imports will be a little bit lower this year, but they could well be more like 2020 or even 2019, which would still be quite strong figures. The poor Indian crop, or the possibility of a poor Indian crop, I think is probably already factored into the market. And we've seen that in raw cashew nut prices internationally. The question is, how much will India need? Will it reach 1 million tons? Will it reach the 1.2 million tons that some people predict? That can be a big influence, particularly on those harvests in countries like Benin, like Guinea-Bissau, like Senegal, where Indian buyers like the quality of that product. And finally, there are some short positions in the market, and sadly, there'll be more short positions in the market as this kernels market moves up, and there'll be more short positions because there'll be defaults of contract. And when there are defaults of contract, it creates this double impact of not only buying because of need, but also buying contracts that aren't coming. And that takes two forms. It's simply replacing the contracts, but it's also renegotiating prices, sometimes doubling up in order to average prices. So keep a close eye on that. That's probably the only factor that can bring some real volatility into this market right now. Otherwise, most of the facts are known. We know where demand is. We know roughly where crops are. There's nothing at this point, we're early days of May, there's nothing likely to come into the market that could shock us in terms of the production in 2022. So generally speaking, we're looking of the market, a progression in demand, perhaps not at the pace of the last 3 or 4 years, but we are in a period of demand growth. And I think that probably second half 2022 cashew kernels prices will be higher than they are today, but I don't see any reason why we'll see one of those 2017 type phenomenons where the market took off and quickly got out of control. That seems highly unlikely to me. Raw cashew nut prices, I think we've seen the increase in price for the time being, certainly in the international market. If buyers support that, it remains steady. Some prices have been marked up very quickly and maybe need a slight correction. Farm gate prices, I don't really see much change for the time being, at least in farm gate prices. You might see prices maintained while quality drops a little, which effectively, I guess, is a price increase. But we're not likely to see any huge volatility at the farm gate the way I'm seeing it right now. That's the outlook for now. We're going to have a chat with our two guests, and then we will take some questions. Let's come to our...
Very much. I think you can go ahead.
This are from Guinea-Bissau, Mr. John Rao. Good morning.
Good morning,
to you.
Jim. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you keeping?
Pretty good. As you can see, we have network problems here. So I will switch off my video and continue voice.
Sounds good, John. Tell us how you see it evolving this year.
Every year in Guinea-Bissau, we say the cashew season is different. Well, this year seems to be even more different than normal. That's the way I would put it. Let's start with the crops. The crop is developing very well, and I don't think we will have a short crop here, unlike Benin and some other origins. The weather is supporting the crops. We have hot days and cool nights, which my farmer friends tell me is very good for the fruit development. A bit of harvesting has started in the interior. Goods have not yet started moving to Bissau because the import-export licenses have not yet been issued. And so we're all waiting for the government to start issuing the export licenses, which will enable us to start bringing goods from the interior into Bissau. A lot of pre-financing has gone into the bush, and a lot of rice and cash has gone in. And so we wait to see how the crop will develop. That's on the crop side. As far as the prices and the taxes and all are concerned, it seems to be a trend in Guinea-Bissau that every year the taxes are increased. And this year, not only the taxes, but the base for calculation of duties and taxes has also been increased. Last year, it was $850, the base. And this year, it has been increased to $1,050. And apart from that, the dollar has strengthened, and we work on euro basis. It would seem that this should help us in the initial part of the year. But then, when those people who are borrowing funds in euros, and if the dollar starts weakening towards the end of the year when payments start coming in, or let's say even in the next 2-3 months, they're going to have problems meeting their repayment obligations. But the biggest preoccupation for us out here is shipping. As I think most of the players in Guinea-Bissau, the buyers and the exporters know, the Maersk Line quit from Guinea-Bissau due to various issues. And the government did make attempts to bring them back, but apparently they have not yet reached a solution. And so that leaves CMA CGM right now as the sole containerized cargo operator from here. Now they are in negotiation with the government. They've promised to put in extra services. It remains to be seen how that will pan out. As of date, they've still not given their freight rates indications. Meanwhile, the exporters, as usual, very resourceful bunch of people, have been working out various deals to negotiate bulk vessels, right from small bulk vessels of 6,000 tons to maybe bigger bulk vessels of 15,000, 17,000 tons. And so yes, we expect a lot more bulk vessels this year as compared to last year. A few companies from Senegal have offered to do a feeder service from Bissau to Senegal, smaller quantities. This might be interesting given the fact that the maximum summer draft on both the quays in Guinea-Bissau is really not very deep. And so yes, so right now shipping is the biggest concern. And the rest of it is the usual, how do we say, the cloud of the season or the haze of the season, and which is par for the course.
Yeah, the haze of the season, it's like that saying, isn't it? The fog of war. Yeah. It's never really clear. Would there be a different tax regime if people exported via Senegal?
No, there would be absolutely no difference in taxes. And in fact, the freight rates might work out cheaper than what would be applicable from the port of Guinea-Bissau. This is very interesting because freight rates from Dakar to the destination ports in Vietnam and India are far lower than freight rates direct from Bissau to destination ports.
That is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means you could load smaller feeder vessels, lower draft, quicker, I guess?
In theory, that sounds very good. Practically speaking, even DP World, giant player, tried to put in a service last year, but they could not. We have our usual blockages maybe in, let me put it that way. We have our blockages in Guinea-Bissau, which they're not able to overcome. But we hope that a lot, the smaller players will try to work out a solution. And so they will put in a feeder vessel. But these feeder vessels, again, there are two options. DP World gave us the option of bringing in empty boxes, loading in Bissau and taking them back to Dakar for reshipment, which is a very clean operation, very nice operation. The other vessels will be taking cashew in bulk from Guinea-Bissau and will load into containers in Dakar. This would entail maybe somebody going in from this side to supervise the loading and stuff. The experience last year was not very positive for people who used this option last year. So yeah, there are pros and cons to each solution.
I'd imagine buyers would prefer that the containers would be stuffed in Bissau
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many factors, right? Mixing of goods, quality, losses, damages, so many issues. Absolutely. The issue with bulk shipments, Jim, this year, like I was talking to a friend, I mean, if CMA CGM does increase their services, they have been pushing hard with the government to get priority in berthing. As you know, there are 2 Ks out here in Bissau. Mm-hmm. The smaller K has a summer draft of 6.5 meters, which really is a theoretical figure because it hasn't been dredged in many years. And so there's been a lot of silting. So practically speaking, maybe we should work it around a figure of 4.5 meters. So this means, you can't even load, if you bring a bigger vessel, you can't even load 1,000 tons on the smaller K. You have to come back to the bigger K. And of course, containerized vessels like CMA, CGM and other operators, there's no way they can go to the smaller K. Now, if we are all going to fight for place on the bigger K, and if CMA, CGM needs a minimum of, let's say, 5 to 6 days, and they come in even 3 times a month, so there's 15 to 20 days with CMA, CGM. So then the other bulk vessels that come in are going to have to fight for the remaining 10 or 15 days. So it's going to be interesting. Added to the fact that the rains will start in July, maybe August. And so let's see how it develops.
Yeah, as always, interesting is a nice word to use in this case. But I must say, I've often thought that some work in the port, there's a lot of promised aid and investment in Guinea-Bissau. It often seems to me that if you could improve the port, it would enhance the cash flow of the sector, particularly this year, remove some of the currency risk for exporters, and could have a very positive impact in terms of competition within the port. And it would be really good to see that. And if you could get that draft back to 6.5 meters, that could change the picture quite a lot.
I think that would be a great first step. There have been so many other proposals also. The feeder port, about 40 kilometers from here, the secondary port at Buba. We have a lot of good plans out here. Why do they not get executed is a topic for discussion in the evenings,
I noticed that not only the tax, but the basis for calculation has increased. That's quite a significant increase.
We estimate about a $50 increase over last year.
That makes a big difference. And do you think, I often wonder when I see these tax increases and I see governments, forgive me for using this word, but tampering with the market. I often think that ends up back essentially at the farm gate. I mean, is there evidence that buyers of RCN in Vietnam and in India are prepared to pay higher prices this year covering these tax increases?
There is a lot of resistance to price increases this year. I mean, I'm hearing of contracts in the range of $1,200 to $1,300 right now, and which is actually not a workable price for exporters, because we are getting the bush price has already gone up to about 350, 375 CFR, which means the Bissau price will be not less than 450 to 500 CFR, the Weybridge price when the Weybridge opens. If you take that into consideration, then and if you take financing cost into consideration, and the fact that we might be holding goods for a long time this year before we get the chance to ship, I mean, it doesn't really cover the costs, and we just about break even with that. And if prices go further, we're all sitting at the casino table right now.
Yeah, I mean, those buying ideas seem a little bit low compared to the rest of the market.
Yes. Yeah, but you must remember the tax component is very high in Guinea-Bissau.
Yes.
130 to 140 CFR. Compared to that, Senegal has practically nothing. Conakry, I think, about $11 or $12. And Gambia also has practically nothing.
Yeah, so again, we may see border trade, in inverted commas, a feature this year.
This is an interesting factor. In fact, we were all quite surprised that the exports from the port touched 235,000 tons last year. And we estimate another 40,000 tons went across the border, which means the crop size has increased last year. And this year we expect no significant increase, but of course we expect no decrease in crop size as compared to, let's say, the other origins. So that's very good. It seems like a lot of new planting, a lot of new trees have started maturing, coming to age. So that is a positive sign out here. And the other factor is that Senegal seems to be very consistent in its policy of trying to develop the port of Ziguinchor.
Mm-hmm.
And so even the Senegalese exporters, my friend who's from Senegal, I'm sure he will tell you, they have been strictly stopped from Guinea-Bissau into Casamas. But goods going out from there, they're very particular about that. So yes, there's not much smuggling happening from Senegal into Gambia as before. Of course, a little bit will happen across the borders. That cannot be stopped. But and the port of Gambia's figures bear it out. I mean, they used to export up to 80, 90,000 tons earlier, significantly down to about 40,000 tons nowadays.
That's right. It's very clear in the Banjul figures.
Yeah. And now the interesting problem is the port of Ziguinchor has a similar problem to the port of Guinea-Bissau, to the port of Bissau, in that they have a low summer draft. And so the vessels that carry the containers to Dakar, max they can load maybe about 170 boxes on each vessel. So the exporters there, I was talking to somebody just last night, and he was saying, look, if I need to export 100 boxes, I'll probably get an allocation of 5 or 10 boxes on each vessel. So he says, you do the math and tell me how much time it's going to take me to export my cargo from here.
And cost, of course, in financing and storing product.
That's right.
Speaking of Senegal, thank you, John. We're going to come back to you, I guess, I'm sure with some comments and questions. I'd like to come to our guest from Senegal and to welcome him. He hasn't been with us before. Baboucar Kounta, good morning to you.
Bonjour tout le monde. Déjà, je suis Baboucar Kounta, je suis le président de l'interprofession Cashew du Sénégal. Et je m'excuse du bruit qui sera derrière parce que actuellement je suis en Italie au forum de Macfoot. Donc, je suis obligé de faire l'exposé à partir de là. Je suis parti d'une délégation du ministère du Commerce, de l'Agriculture pour assister à ce salon au nom de l'interprofession. Donc, je m'excuse du bruit que vous allez entendre tout au long de mon intervention. Alors, pour le cashew au Sénégal, la situation, on a commencé un peu, surtout dans la zone de Sokone. Il faut dire que le Sénégal, le cashew de façon générale, se trouve dans 3 zones différentes, à savoir la zone des Niayes, qui est une zone où la quantité est très faible, mais qui est destinée à la transformation locale. Et aussi à la zone de Sokone, qui est frontalière avec la Gambie, et la zone qu'on appelle souvent la zone Sinsalo et la zone Casamance. Donc actuellement, en ce qui concerne la collecte, on le sent plutôt dans la zone Sinsaloum où les prix sont de façon trop excessive, dont j'aimerais même poser la question que est-ce que réellement il y a cette offre au niveau du marché international? Parce que les prix varient aujourd'hui entre 625 à 725 borchamps. Donc, pour la Casamance, il faut juste noter que la collecte avait démarré, mais la commercialisation en tant que telle débutera dans cette semaine. C'est-à-dire, on commencera à mener les produits au niveau du port de Ziguinchor pour préparer une éventuelle exportation. Et pour ça aussi, il faut juste constater que les prix commencent à être vraiment à la hausse. Parce qu'on est à 550 déjà au port de Ziguinchor. Et si on le compare à l'année dernière, le prix maximum au port, c'était ces 550. C'était 550, voire 600. Donc, il faut juste noter qu'il y a vraiment une perturbation à côté prix pour aller vraiment vers l'exportation. J'ai écouté un peu mon ami de la Guinée-Bissau. C'est vrai, au Sénégal, on rencontre les mêmes problèmes par rapport à l'exportation. Au port de Ziguinchor, les bateaux amènent, par exemple, le bateau qui vient pour exporter amène 250 conteneurs vides pour en ramener au retour à 150. Donc, le tirant d'eau est très faible. Donc, le problème de l'exportation pose un grand problème. Par contre, la loi qui interdit l'exportation, c'est interdire l'exportation par voie terrestre. Du coup, il y a une ouverture par voie routière vers Dakar. Ce qu'il faut noter que jusqu'à présent, la production sénégalaise, c'est vrai, est difficile à être déterminé parce que il y a une entrée forte de la production par voie clandestine de la production guinéenne qui est aux alentours de 50 000 tonnes. Parce que si vous regardez, l'année dernière, le produit exporté par le port de Ziguinchor était de 82 000 tonnes pour un chiffre d'affaires de 55 000 qui était estimé à 55 milliards. Mais la production sénégalaise aussi augmente. Hein. Je peux dire aujourd'hui, on a dépassé les 35 000 tonnes, M. Dim, parce que pourquoi on a pu contrôler aussi la quantité de la production du Sénégal qui, en grande partie, était exportée vers la Gambie. Aujourd'hui, si je prends le cas de Sokone, puisque la quantité totale de la production de cette zone est exportée vers la Gambie. Donc, c'est ce qui explique un peu avec cette mesure, on commence à avoir un peu vraiment la quantité de la production sénégalaise. Il faut avouer aussi que les arbres dans cette zone de la Casamance sont vieillissants. D'où il y a pour cette année, effectivement, il y aura quelques changements au niveau des taxes. Il y aura une taxe à l'export qui sera de 15 francs. Et aussi, il y aura des agréments pour l'exportation. Il y aura des agréments pour l'exportation, même aussi des cautions pour être exportateur au niveau du Sénégal. Bon, c'est des mesures qui ne sont pas encore publiques, mais qui sont vraiment en train d'être prises. Et une partie de ces mesures, à savoir la taxe de l'exportation, l'agrément sera vraiment appliqué pour cette présente campagne. En grosso modo, c'est ça que je veux vraiment ramasser et dire que depuis 2021, le Sénégal a une interprofession qui est Cashew du Sénégal, reconnue par l'État du Sénégal, qui est l'interlocuteur officiel de l'État, mais aussi qui est l'interlocuteur auprès des partenaires et des projets qui interviennent dans l'année 4. C'est ça que je veux vraiment présenter. Et s'il y a des questions, on va essayer de répondre. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Baboucar. So we see a very interesting situation evolving as described in Senegal, increasing production, certainly a better controlled situation, some lack of clarity as Mr. Baboucar mentioned, and as John mentioned, the cross-border trade from Guinea-Bissau still has a big influence. Interestingly, we see early season high farm gate prices. Senegalese cashew nuts are very high quality, but prices of 655, 655 CFA. Compared, for example, to what we're seeing in Guinea-Bissau, John mentioned 375. These are big prices, as Baboucar pointed out. We're also seeing evolving support for the sector. So it's clear that in this region, with a crop in Guinea-Bissau that could be as high as 265,000 tons based on export, formal and informal, and with increasing production in Senegal from a base estimated around about 50,000 tons, these areas are becoming more and more important in terms of their supply of high-quality cashew nuts to the international market. But as both our speakers have told us and explained it very clearly, the logistics challenges are there. And it's clearly in both ports, there's significant logistical challenges. So thank you to both our speakers. And I think what we'll do now is we'll ask Ernest to let us know if there are any questions. But before I do that, John, I see your hand raised. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, Jim, I'd just like to clarify that 350, 375 is the prix bord de champ. That means the price in the bush. Okay, yes. And there are a lot of taxes the government has put on the farmers and the intermediaries, and there is the cost of transport and the commission paid to the intermediaries. So what we normally calculate as our base, what would we call the port price, export price in Abidjan, is what we call the ex-Weybridge price in Bissau. And that would be 75 to 100 CFA higher than the bush price. So we're talking prices of maybe 450 to 475 ex-Weybridge in Guinea-Bissau, in Bissau.
So that would mean prices, in order to make this work this season, exporters need prices significantly above that $1,300 that you mentioned as a buyer idea earlier on.
Yes, they do.
Okay, and probably justifiable given some of the prices we're seeing for Benin material and other West African origins at the moment. And certainly based on the farm gate price mentioned by Baboucar in Senegal, it looks as if we're looking at a rather steady season in terms of prices in the region.
I agree. Our only concern is that even last year, prices started off, prices went up very high very quickly and then dropped. And that is a concern, which led to, very sadly, a renegotiation of some contracts towards the end. And but that's a fact of life nowadays.
Yeah, but a highly disruptive factor for the market as a whole in terms of raw cashew nuts and in terms of kernels. This so-called renegotiation, better described as contract default, is highly disruptive in these markets. Let us have a look and see what questions or comments, and I'll pass you to Ernest.
Thank you very much, Jim. And thank you very much also, John and Boubacar. Boubacar, congratulations for the formation of the Senegal's Interprofession to really help drive the sector in Senegal. There are a number of questions here, and there are based on 4 regions or countries. So we have the Guinea-Bissau, Senegal area. We also have questions on India, China, and Brazil. So I'm going to go in that order. So first of all, for John, I know that there was a question asking you to clarify the taxes, which you have done. But then as a follow-up question on that one, the point is that who is bearing these tax increases? Is it something that is being pushed to the farmer, and bearing in mind that the farmers have, or the government has some kind of a fixed farm gate price, what is happening at the level of prices for farmers in respect of these new increases in the taxes? So I think I'll pause on that, and then once then I come then on this.
Ernest, thank you. Well, it's interesting. The government has found ways to tax cashew at every level out here, because cashew really is the biggest game in town in Guinea-Bissau. So you have a farmer's tax of 15 CFR. You have an intermediary's tax of 13 CFR. You have various other charges for, transporting goods, storing goods for each and every balance that the intermediaries use. And then you come down to Guinea-Bissau, and then you have a whole set of other taxes for the exporters. Okay. And in fact, currently there's a dispute between the intermediaries and the government, because the government has told the intermediaries to collect the farmer's tax and remit it to the government. And the intermediaries say, you have your tax collection mechanism right down to the Tabanka level, right down to the village level. So you collect your taxes, don't tell us to collect taxes from the farmers. So you see, this is how it plays out in terms of the different taxes. How does this impact the overall picture? In the first instance, of course, it is we, the exporters, who are going to have to pay for it because we buy the goods. But ultimately, the international price for cashew moves up and down based on various other factors. It definitely does not move up and down based on the tax structure of Guinea-Bissau. So very clearly, if the taxes are increased in Guinea-Bissau, at some stage, it will have an impact on the price paid to the farmer, meaning the farmer's price will go down. And this is just the way the market works. So now it's up to the government to decide how much money do they want the farmers to get directly, and how much money do they need for their expenditure. I do understand Guinea-Bissau being the major crop in a very small country, it is a major source of revenue for the government, and the government, every government has a lot of expenditure. We do understand all those points, but I think just eternally increasing taxes is probably not the right way to go.
The next question actually also goes to you. It's asking about the fact that Maersk has quit Guinea-Bissau. What has been the impact on cost and turnaround time? I think you've touched largely on it. But then the question goes on to ask, is road transport to Ziguinchor allowed? And if so, what are the nature of the roads?
Okay, there are two issues here. Number one, Maersk used to ship about 60% of containerized cargo from Guinea-Bissau. And they had an issue which we all feel should have been settled way before it became so serious. But anyway, the fact of the matter is they finally decided we are going to pull out, and they have pulled out. There was a government delegation that actually went down to their head office and tried to get them back. But apparently they've still not agreed on the terms and conditions, or rather the conditions put forward by Maersk to come back. So for all practical purposes, the only major line that is going to operate from Guinea-Bissau this year is CMA-CGM. The fact is, when you're in a monopoly situation, anybody would be tempted to increase prices, especially in the current scenario where I think a lot of shipping lines have made losses for a few years earlier and have only seen good times, I would say, since last year. And the kinds of freight rates we are seeing are incredible. Having said that, CMA-CGM in global forums and even MSC have mentioned that they are not in favor of very high freight rates, and they will do their best to control rates. So we look forward with optimism to word from the CMA-CGM head office. We talk to their local office daily, and I'm sure as soon as they receive the freight rates, which should be probably this week or later next week, we will be in a position to decide what will be the containerized freight rates. For bulk cargo, initial offers have been received in the range of $270 to $300, or rather I would say $280 to $300 per ton. But the market is really heated up now. I don't think anybody can negotiate bulk cargo rates less than $300 now, probably in the range of $320.
Thank you very much, John.
Yeah.
Let me go to Boubacar now. Boubacar, if you are still on, if you can hear me, you talked about export taxes to be introduced. Now that there is this kind of a discussion, and then also I don't know whether it's possible for you to address any rates are already being mentioned, and what kind of process, consultative process, I guess, is being used to arrive at that export tax. Again, is the government going to introduce minimum farm gate prices for Senegal? So the question is more about the export tax. How is it going to be done? Is there any mention already of any rates? And then secondly, you are talking about prices rising, whether there is any farm gate price so that people can also look at it in the context of the rising prices. Boubacar?
Bon, oui, si j'ai bien compris, la question c'est de savoir est-ce que le fait qu'il y a la taxe, est-ce qu'il y a un prix borçant? Si j'ai bien compris la question.
Yes, you got me right. Boubacar, it is to find out whether Senegal sets a minimum farm gate price. And secondly, whether there is any indication of how much tax the government is talking about introducing this year.
Alors, il faut dire que ce n'est pas même l'État qui avait décidé, c'est juste que l'interprofession CASO, qui pour un peu soutenir la filière CASO, a décidé cette année, avec l'accompagnement du ministère du Commerce, de mettre une taxe à l'export, qui sera de 15 francs. Ces 15 francs, il y aura un 5 francs qui doit être supporté par le collecteur et les 10 francs doivent être supportés par l'exportateur. Mais du coup, c'est à l'exportateur de collecter, que ce soit les 5 et les 10 francs, à le verser au moment de l'exportation. Ce sera contrôlé par une société qui sera mise en place au niveau du port de Ziguinchor. Par contre, le prix borçant, le Sénégal, pour l'instant, on n'a pas une idée clairement de pouvoir mettre en place un prix borçant. Par contre, il y a un prix indicateur, donc un prix conseillé qui est toujours communiqué chez les producteurs. Ça veut dire que cette année, le prix borçant qui est communiqué, c'est le prix de 500 francs. Maintenant, ce n'est pas un prix plancher. C'est un prix indicateur qui permettra au producteur d'avoir une idée de vendre son produit. Et par contre, il y aura des prix, ce prix boursier permet, avec l'introduction du système de récépissé d'entrepôt qui est présent chez les producteurs jusqu'à l'exportateur, de guider les banques à avoir une idée du prix du cashew sénégalais. Mais il n'y a pas un prix, vraiment.
Thank you very much.
Il n'y a pas un prix plancher.
Okay, thank you very much, Boubacar. The last question on the region is for John. The question is that we heard from Boubacar the fact that the government in Senegal is looking at introducing programs to address the issue of age increase in Senegal. And we know it is also a big issue in Guinea-Bissau. And so the question is there any government program being mentioned in Guinea-Bissau to improve cashew production, especially farm programs for age increase, whether there is any mention of that?
Ernest, I have not heard of any major government programs to increase the cropping area and stuff like that. Having said that, about 93% of the cashew farms in Guinea-Bissau are small holdings, about 3 acres, 3 to 5 acres. And NGOs have become active in this sector. And I think USAID and other funding agencies have put in place millions of dollars for the Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau region. And a lot of NGOs are tailoring programs to fit into these funding objectives. So yes, NGOs are working in that. One word of caution I would submit is that a lot of NGOs, even in the Gambia area, are getting into nurseries and distribution of saplings and seedlings, okay? This is a very good project, but they need to pay attention to the quality of nuts that they are picking, okay? Guinea-Bissau has been blessed in the sense that the quality by itself naturally is excellent. I think we should be careful to make sure that we continue propagating these species of nuts and not try to get, other inferior quality nuts or other quality nuts that are not suitable for this area, which will spoil the quality and the reputation of Guinea-Bissau nuts, specific to Guinea-Bissau. One small point, if I could add to the previous question, I think somebody had asked about transport by road and truck from Bissau or from Guinea-Bissau to Ziguinchor, to Senegal. Technically, that would be called smuggling because Guinea-Bissau's rules state that, I see Jim smiling, because as per the rules of Guinea-Bissau, this is smuggling. All goods are supposed to be exported from the port of Guinea-Bissau, from the port of Bissau, I'm sorry. Now, naturally, when you have a lot of high taxes and duties, people, especially close to the border, will be encouraged to just take their goods across the border to Senegal, where they can get a much higher price. But this happens on a rather informal basis. It happens in the nights. In fact, for those of you who would like to participate in some adventures, it's done on donkey back, on bicycles, deep in the night, little paths, not on the main roads. So no, you will not see remorques and trucks carrying 30, 40, 50 tons of cashew rolling down the highways, going into Senegal. No, you will not see that. But yes, a significant amount of cashew, estimated about 40,000 tons, does cross the borders every year.
Thank you very much, John. And thanks to Boubacar. So now I move to Jim. And Jim, coming from Guinea-Bissau, there's still, in fact, Senegal, there is one last question there. Boubacar was talking about the farm gate prices rising and what they had recorded in the last year, and he was even out elsewhere. And Jim, what do you think accounts for the price increases that are being experienced at the farm gate in Senegal today?
It's, of course, this is a difficult question to answer. But I mean, first of all, we have to remember that it's early season. Early in the season, we often see high prices. We often see high prices for specific lots of particular quality, and we see that for certain reasons. So we have to be careful that perhaps someone who's got an early season commitment for export, who has an early season contract and needs to meet that contract, may well be prepared to pay a higher price. There are a lot of other factors in play at the moment. The currency, for example, we've seen the strengthening dollar, the dollar strengthening against the euro, and that has knock-on effect in West Africa, of course. So these are factors. I think Boubacar was very clear that he finds it difficult to understand these high prices, and so do I. And therefore, I would say this is probably an early season phenomenon, and prices will probably normalize. Now, you would expect that Senegal's farm gate prices would be higher than some of their neighboring countries, often the combination. Firstly, a high tax regime country neighboring a low tax regime country, and secondly, difficulties in logistics, in moving product from certain regions to ports. So the actual natural port might actually be in another country. And if you've got differences in tax regimes between the two, you're bound to see some smuggling in that case. And that has an impact. Interestingly, the impact can be positive at the farm gate in that it can increase prices, but it can be negative generally for the trade. And this is, if you listen to our discussion this morning, this subject of regulation of the sectors, and especially differences in regulation between countries, is a subject that we keep coming back to in each one of our webinars, and you'll see it in a lot of studies, that the differences in regulation, the differences in structures between markets that share land borders has a huge impact on pricing and a huge impact on the prospects for the sectors. And governments, we would wish that governments would take that into account when they make their policies.
Thank you very much, Jim. And now we move to India. There are a number of questions here. How much is Vietnam exporting kernels to India? So probably how much kernels are exported from Vietnam to India? And then the other question on India is how much Burma kernels are moving from Africa to India? And then I think finally, how would you factor in the significant drop in processing during first 4 months in India in terms of RCN quantity? Isn't that a huge volume? So these three set of questions on India, if you could address them.
Okay, none of them easy. Well, on the first one, yes, there are exports from Vietnam to India. There are exports officially, which are I think it's in the region of about 3,000 tons. Bear in mind that India is a very highly protected market at about 3,000 tons. I think I stand to be corrected on that, but that's the figure in my mind from last year. On the Burma kernels issue, I've got to say, I think that the whole Burma kernels trade is highly negative for the African processing development. I think it leaves a certain amount of value addition in African countries, but it also leaves behind it all of the problems of managing the byproducts, managing the industry, and it's a halfway house. It's not sustainable. It's almost as environmentally damaging as the raw cashew nut trade, perhaps not quite. And for me, it's a stopgap measure. It's opportunistic trading. How much moves is difficult to say. We did some work on this. We were able to identify 19,000 tons of Burma kernels, but I think it's more than that. I think it could be as high as 30,000 tons. Again, it's not something that's, let's say, advertised or promoted, but it has been significant. I don't think it's rising as quickly as it was, but it does remain a significant factor. So I can't give you an exact answer. I can say for certain we tracked 19,000 tons 2 years ago, but we think that's higher. It could be as much as 30,000 tons. The third factor, how would you factor in the significant drop in processing during the first 4 months in India in terms of RCN quantity? Well, I think if we look at India, first of all, we've got to say that imports in the first quarter, imports in the first 2 months of the year were the highest level of imports for that period in 10 years, which seems to indicate that demand is relatively strong for raw cashew nuts. Perhaps the figures are slightly distorted. Maybe transit times are longer, particularly from Tanzania, than they were in the past. On the basis of what we see, I think we can conclude that processors in India are under some pressure. High cost raw material, the tough times last year and the year before, these are all taken a factor. But at the starting point of this year, taking into account an opening stock estimated in the region of about 80,000 tons of RCN unsold, imports for the first 2 months for which we have figures, and we have anecdotal figures for the quarter, it looks like imports were relatively strong. The market tells us, based on prices and based on activity, that a drop in processing in India in the first quarter probably hasn't had the effect that would have been expected. On the other hand, we're not seeing significantly rising prices for kernels, at least not for the main whole grades in India, which would suggest that the market is at some form of equilibrium. I think at the moment we have to be quite careful, and the value of raw cashew nuts in West Africa is in play, so to speak. Many people are looking at this situation and wondering just where they can get the best value. And we're seeing a lot of factors thrown in. At this moment in time, the outlook for India from this point onwards, I think, looks quite positive. But I also think that the dependence on imported raw cashew nuts has been growing, and that will continue in 2022.
Thank you very much, Jim. And now we move to China. The presentation is showing that China accounts for 85,000 tons of kernel consumption, and that is for 2021. And then we are seeing that the Q1 2021 to Q1 2022 drop in kernel exports from Vietnam to China was alone 60,000 metric tons. So here the person is saying this is really significant. And if you could dive into what actually drives consumption in China, and to explain how this can impact on the sector in the coming months.
China has become an important consumer. There's no doubt about that. Chinese imports have been rising. I think the growth rate is just over 7% per annum over the last 5 years. The Chinese market is naturally, when you look at the map, dominated by supplies from Vietnam. In China, we have growing consumption of almost everything. We see huge growth in trade from countries in Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam in particular, but also Laos. We also see growing trade from Myanmar into China on a whole range of items, including cashew nuts. So the dynamics of the trade are, first of all, we've got to say that China is quite a price-sensitive market, and it will be impacted by price. The last 3 years have been hugely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, as we know. This year, in the first quarter, based on Vietnamese shipments, we've seen a drop. I think the drop is 58% in shipments from Vietnam to China. However, the point I was trying to make of our webinar was that the first quarter is important, and it's important because you have Chinese New Year, the biggest festival of the year, and that's followed by the Spring Festival. So it is very important. And unlike other markets in China, when that demand is gone, it's gone. It doesn't catch up. You have the Chinese New Year, and then you have month by month the rest of the year. So when we see a situation where demand is rising rapidly, sometimes if there's a fall in demand in the first quarter, it can be made up later in the year. But in the last 2 years, that hasn't happened. And therefore, I think that when we look at the growth in the Chinese market, we have to consider the 9 months of the year, the second 9 months of the year rather than the first quarter. So what we're seeing in China is greater interest in snack foods, greater interest in tree nuts. We're seeing an increase in healthy eating patterns. And if you look at Chinese imports of tree nuts, which would include cashew nuts, but also a whole range of other tree nuts, in the first quarter of 2022, by value, Chinese imports are up by 30%, which is really very strong. And that indicates strong consumer trends on tree nuts. Therefore, I think that for the rest of the year, we should probably, assuming as seems to be the case, that the COVID-19 outbreak is under control, and bear in mind they have a zero COVID policy in China, so we see very severe lockdowns very quickly. The outlook for tree nuts remains very positive, based on very similar factors to those found in Europe or lately in the United States. So I think what we will see is that demand, rather than peaking in the first quarter, is much more spread throughout the year. And we had a look at monthly shipment figures from Vietnam to China. Vietnam is about 97% of China's cashew supply at the moment. There is a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, from Africa, but about 97% from Vietnam. So on that basis, I think what we're going to see is an evening out of China's imports throughout the year. Taking that into account, we should think that it's quite likely that monthly imports from China, into China rather, from May onwards will be quite normal. And therefore, you would estimate that the consumption in China will be lower than last year. So last year we mentioned 85,000 tons. It'll probably be much more like the 2019 figure, which was 70,000 tons, because as I say, you lose the first quarter, they don't make it up, it's over. Now, the impact of Chinese demand in Vietnam is strong because the demand comes for Chinese New Year, which is before the important Tet, Lunar New Year festival in Vietnam. So it's important for Vietnamese processors because they sell their inventory, they sell it relatively quickly, and they're paid relatively quickly, which is a big impact on where they end one season and start the next season. And the absence of Chinese demand, in my opinion, might have a greater effect on the market sentiment in Vietnam than it actually has on the volumes. So people look, there's no Chinese buyers, the market is quiet in Europe and the US as it normally is in the first part of the year. Demand is down. It would be a wrong conclusion to think, and we saw it in 2020 and 2021, sharp dip in kernels prices, followed by an increase. And it looks like we're seeing a similar pattern this year. So China is important. It's important in the first quarter. It's important for Vietnamese buyers. But as time goes on, I think we can look forward to increased demand for tree nuts in China. It is a product that they can process in China, and they do import small volumes of raw cashew nuts. It's not a product that can be grown widely in China, so it will continue to be an import item. It's a big subject, by the way, so I can't really answer the whole Chinese story today, but maybe one of these days we'll have a look at it.
Exactly. We need to dig a bit deep in there. Now let's move to Brazil, where it seems there is no information coming on Brazil, and they seem to be out of contention. The question is, how significant is Brazilian production and processing to the global situation today? Is it that everything being produced there is being processed and then probably being consumed, and as a result, they have no role at all in the global cashew situation or scenario? So if you can clarify that, because it seems for a bit of a while we haven't touched on Brazil and how their activities impact on the global situation in terms of cashew.
Well, it would not be correct to say that Brazil is insignificant. Of course, it is a significant origin. So I think that firstly, we should say that Brazilian production of cashew nuts has declined dramatically. Figures, I think this year, somewhere around about 125,000 tons of raw cashew nuts. That figure was at one point as high as 480,000 tons, I believe. going back, but it's fallen away significantly. And of course, as it's fallen away, so too has processing fallen away. Why? The question I suppose that might be asked is that why hasn't Brazil resorted to the import of large volumes of raw cashew nuts? And we've seen a couple of factors there. First of all, it's not easy to import raw cashew nuts into Brazil. Secondly, the structure of the Brazilian industry was developed along the lines of a relatively low-cost raw material, large Brazilian cashew nuts, and not ideally suited to the import of West African cashew nuts, for example. Although we did see that at certain points. It peaked in the early part of the last decade at around about 60,000 tons one year was the maximum. That's faded away. Brazil now is continuing to be an important processor. It supplies the European market. It supplies the North American market with food safe, high quality cashew kernels from mechanized plants. But the number of plants has been severely reduced. I think the operating plants now is, I think it's 4, but I stand to be corrected on that. And that peaked. The average figure was about 15, and there were more plants than that at one stage. Brazilian cashews are known for their sophisticated processing, but it's generally a process that's very Brazilian. It's much more industrial, and it's very much high cost of processing, higher levels of wages, needs a lower cost raw material. And that has caused the Brazilian industry, for the time being at least, and to reverse. And there doesn't seem at this moment in time to be any change in that. But to say Brazil is insignificant wouldn't be correct. Brazil is still a significant exporter of kernels. All Brazilian cashew nuts are shelled in Brazil. It's a significant exporter of cashew kernels to Europe and to the United States.
Thank you very much, Jim. And the last country is Ghana. The questioner wants to know whether the Ghana analysis can be included. And I will also want to say that in the last GME, we had talked about a second crop coming in Ghana. What is the situation like, if you can quickly add some analysis on Ghana?
Well, we talk about Ghana every GME. We didn't talk this time because there's not so much new information to offer. What I can say to you in Ghana is that this year the crop looks that it's been pretty good. It was traded early. Ghanaian raw cashew nuts are favored by Indian buyers. Usually the quality is high and the price is high. And a lot of the Ghanaian material has already been shipped. Of course, Ghana is a growing in terms of its cashew production, and the government has put in place a regulatory body and has put in place a minimum farm gate price. But this year, farm gate prices were way in excess of the minimum. Ghana is also, as I think everyone knows, a very important transit country for the export of raw cashew nuts. The 2 ports, Takoradi, Tema, being very important for the export of raw cashew nuts. So we do include Ghana. It's faded from the analysis this time simply because the season is, at least the season for Ghanaian produced raw cashew nuts is ending. There's not a great deal of commentary on the developments in the processing sector there. Similarly, when we come to the next GME, we'll probably start to drop countries where the crop is finishing off the analysis. We won't be talking about the Cambodian crop, for example, in June, when that crop is already set and over. And that's the reason why it's not on here. We will come back to Ghana, of course, when we get into discussion of the next crop, or if we see specific developments on processing, for example, or on the developing regulatory system in Ghana, where we expect to see some developments in the course of this year. Ernest.
Thank you very much, Jim. There are no further questions, but before you tell us what to expect in the next fortnight, let me already put a request that has been made to have an update on processing from different countries, especially Africa, for 2021. So all throughout 2021, coming to the end of it, what was the processing volumes that were recorded in the different countries? and also probably the trend of it so far, so that there is a better view whether it is improving or not. So, but it is not to say this is what you will be sharing with us in the next fortnight. So please tell us, what do we expect in the next fortnight?
Yeah, I mean, we have addressed processing in Africa in an earlier GME and the general trends in that. We do offer, if anyone's interested, we do offer detailed services, surveys, analysis of processing, production, and all kinds of other aspects of the cashew sector if you want to really dig deeply into this. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be closely watching the kernels market to see if buyers enter the kernels market. We're going to be closely keeping an eye on the calendar, especially in relation to Vietnamese buying of raw cashew nuts. We'll be looking to see, I mentioned about 3.3 months stock. We'll be looking to see if Vietnamese buyers become a little bit more active in the market, or if the traders that supply them do. We'll be very closely looking at demand in India, and we'll be updating on all of those subjects when we come back to talk to you again in 2 weeks. And we will have a look at processing in Africa. I'll go back to those slides that we talked about in one of our earlier GMEs this year. And we will have a little look at processing. It's quite a good idea to do that. Again, generally a positive picture. We'll come back and have a look at that briefly in 2 weeks. I think you could see in the next 2 weeks changes in the market that could essentially determine the trajectory of the market for the rest of the year. I think we will see some further price increases in kernels. I think we will see a relatively steady raw cashew nut market, but I don't expect huge moves in raw cashew nut prices. I would say it is a market to be careful in. Don't be short in this market. Prices still, especially on kernels, look relatively low compared to recent years. One needs to be careful on that. Other things I'd like to talk about in the coming weeks are niche markets, organic cashew kernels, fair trade cashew kernels, and the opportunity in those, particularly with a focus on African processors. But for now, I'd like to extend my thanks to John Rao from Guinea-Bissau and Boubacar Quante from Senegal. Thank you for your really excellent contributions today. And from me, I wish you a great week and look forward to talking to you again in 2 weeks. Thanks very much indeed.
Our greatest appreciation to you, Jim Fitzpatrick, also to John and Boubacar and our cherished participants. And thank you very much for being with us. And at this stage, I hand you over to Blessing Ocam to give us whatever information is there. Blessing?
Yes, Ernest, I'm here. Thank you.
Please take over from here, yes. Please.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Jim, also for another successful session of the ACA Global Markets Encounter. We are much grateful to our guests, John and Boubacar, for joining us today, and of course to the audience who joined us as well. A special appreciation to our sponsors and partners, GIZ, USDA, SNI, Intersnag, MEA, Mekong, CMA, among many others. Kindly note that the next session of the Global Market Encounter with Jim Fitzpatrick will be on the 18th of May. So on the 18th of May, we'll be coming your way again. We would also like to inform you of the 16th ACA Annual Cashew Conference, which will be held from the 12th to the 16th of September in Abuja, Nigeria. Mark your calendars. And to come your way again next 2 weeks, please do stay safe. Bye-bye.